we've been speaking to people in this area. We understand that there are around about 23,000 civilians still in the town of Bakhmut, which is about 2-3 kilometers behind me, and the surrounding areas. And we've been asking people, why aren't they leaving? Many of the reasons, as we've already been reporting over the last 7 months, is because people are refusing to leave because they have nothing left to go to. There are a lot of elderly people as well. But there is, one gentleman said, well, one of the main reasons why they're not leaving, according to him, is because they were sympathetic to Russia and they were waiting, in his words, for the Russians to come. We've also been speaking to UN representatives in a village just down the hill here. There's a large humanitarian convoy there that is preparing to try and get into Bakhmut to deliver aid to them. The UN actually unloading their trucks to local humanitarian organisations because the UN are saying it's literally too dangerous to get in there. And with respect to other areas close by, we also understand that there's a lot of heavy fighting in and around the town of Liman, which is the northwest of here. This part of this very seemingly successful counter-offensive over the last couple of weeks by Ukrainians, south of Kharkiv. Liman, a hugely strategic town to the northwest of here. So the Ukrainians pushing in that direction. And as I say, meanwhile, Russian forces seemingly pushing in from behind us. I was here 5 months ago in the town of Bakhmut, and it was very calm. There was the occasional shelling. Russian positions were then around 20 kilometers away. Russian positions now, in the last 5 months or so, have only moved up to the outskirts on the eastern side of Bakhmut. It's an indication of just how slow Russian progress has been in this area. But as I say, there's a lot of artillery in these surrounding hills. There's a lot of shelling going on, as you heard there. And it's expected, as this annexation goes forward, the fighting is only going to escalate.
All right, Charles, thank you so much. We'll let you get to safety. We'll speak to you a little later on. Thank you for the time being. So just a quick look now at the areas of Ukraine that Russia plans to annex. The Kremlin has just said that Luhansk and Donetsk will be incorporated according to the 2014 borders. It's also added that the borders of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions have to be discussed. Separatists reported huge margins of victory in that referendum, saying that in the region of Luhansk, 98% of voters favored annexation. Let's now bring in Rory Challens. He's joining us from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, to tell us how Zelensky is responding to the annexation of these 4 regions in Ukraine.
Well, he's firmly welcomed comments that were made, very strong comments, by Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, on Thursday evening, where Guterres essentially said that these referenda were illegal under international law. They could not stand. They did not express the democratic will of the people in these areas, and that it was high time to step back from the brink. Now, Zelensky has said that he appreciates the clear position of the UN Security Secretary General on the criminal intention of the Russian Federation to illegally annex more Ukrainian lands. What is Zelensky doing about this? Well, he has just finished, we understand, an urgent meeting with his security and defense chiefs. We've had a little brief on what went on in that meeting. They listened to the reports of the commanders. They considered the further plan for the liberation of occupied territories. They considered possible actions of the enemy, and they worked on the issue of providing troops with weapons and ammunition in the hottest of areas. The brief finishes with, we have the situation under control, everything will be Ukraine. Now, clearly there are nerves in Kiev, particularly about the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons by Russia. And the Ukrainian military intelligence has said that the likelihood of that happening is now high, which is alarming, obviously. But ultimately, despite the annexation of the territories, the Ukrainian perspective, the Ukrainian strategy doesn't really change much at the moment. As we have heard there from Zelensky and his military chiefs, they are going to carry on doing what they have been doing. That is to keep on fighting, to keep on trying to liberate occupied territories. And I have to say that in the coming hours, there may well be a collapse of the Russian troops in the area of Liman in northern Donetsk. That could come in the hours, of Putin's annexation celebrations or immediately after, which would, be a setback, significant military setback for the Russians, and throw doubt on Russia's ability to control areas that it has just annexed. That is what Ukraine is going to try and keep on doing, keep on chipping away, keep on taking back territory. It says that at some point in the future, all of those lands will be back under Ukrainian control.
All right, thank you so much. Excuse me, Rory Challin's reporting for us from Kyiv. We're now going to cross over to Georgia. Imran Khan is live at the Larsi border crossing. That's between Georgia and Russia, as thousands try to cross into neighboring countries, Imran, to escape a military mobilization. Tell us what you're seeing there, because we're hearing reports that Russia is opening up military draft offices near its borders.
That's absolutely true, but whether those military draft offices actually open the other side of this border crossing remains to be seen. Currently, this border crossing is open. Let me just give you a better look. Where you can see that coach, that is where a lot of Russians are crossing over by foot. They take a car across the border and then they get into coaches like that take them into Tbilisi, about 4 hours away from here. Now, we were here on Friday as well, and we're not seeing nowhere near the kind of numbers that were crossing yesterday and in previous days, but there is a steady stream of people coming across. One of the reasons for that is that the rules that keep changing here about how people can actually get across the border. In the last few days, they were able to walk over by foot. That's been stopped. Some people came over by bicycles. That's actually been stopped as well. So now people are coming through by cars. But the numbers of people is still a controversy. Opposition politicians are saying that the government's figures of people coming over are simply a lie. They are vastly underestimating them, that more people are coming over than have been previously seen. The government says this is just a larger number of people since the announcement of partial mobilization, but it is a very manageable amount, and the border remains open. It's a very crucial, not just people crossing border, but also a crucial trade border as well. So the fact that the border remains open is a good sign for Georgia-Russia relations, and they have a fairly decent relationship, although there hasn't been an embassy open here by the Russians for a number of years now. But Georgia does have another problem that isn't domestic. It's its relationship with the European Union. If it tries to get behind Russia, then that actually puts it in the European Union's firing sights. And that's something that domestically and internationally now they're trying to navigate.
All right. Thank you so much, Imran Khan, reporting from the Larsi border crossing. What we'll do now is we'll bring in Mohammed Val into the mix. Mohammed is joining us from Moscow. So Russia, as we've been reporting, set to formally annex the 4 areas of Ukraine. Mohammed, how is Putin planning on marking this occasion?
Yes, Darine, it's going to be a big celebration here, both official and public. Behind me, you can see the Kremlin, and this is where this ceremony is going to take place in less than 2 hours from now. Preparations have been going on for 2 days now, or even more. Yesterday, we saw the arrival of the leaders of those 4 breakaway republics, and in the afternoon, President Vladimir Putin issued a decree recognizing the independence of Zaporizhia and Kherson. That's a preliminary step or an intermediary step towards signing a deal with them as sovereign entities. He did the same earlier when in January he recognized Donetsk and Lugansk as independent republics. So the four regions are going to sign a treaty of reunification, or reunification in the Russian term, with the Russian Federation today in the presence of the 2 chambers of the parliament and the cabinet members. After that, President Vladimir Putin is going to deliver what's described here as a major speech. The countdown for the time of that speech and the ceremony has been going on TV screens since yesterday. It's in less than 2 hours from now. Huge crowds of people trying to reach the place, just standing by also in the streets to attend this historic moment, according to Russians here. This is, in the Russian eye, the coronation of the sacrifices of their sons in the front line, thinking that this is a correction of history, that Russia has always been that those four regions have always been a part of Russia, and it is time to reunite with them.
Okay, thank you so much, Mohammed Val, reporting for us from Moscow. Well, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that Russia's plans to annex occupied parts of Ukraine cannot be accepted. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, has more from the UN headquarters in New York.
These are the strongest comments from the UN Secretary General since the start of the war in Ukraine. He talks about so-called referenda, which don't reflect the genuine will of the people living in those areas. And on the plans for annexation, he says they go against international law and against the UN Charter, the founding document of the United Nations.
It stands against everything the international community is meant to stand for. It flouts the purposes and principles of the United Nations. It is a dangerous escalation. It has no place in the modern world. It must not be accepted.
The UN Security Council will meet on Friday. The US and Albania have been working on a draft resolution condemning Russia. There is, of course, little doubt that Russia will veto such a resolution, but already the US ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, has said that she will then take the issue to the UN General Assembly.
Plenty more ahead on the Al Jazeera News Hour, including Ian strengthens to a hurricane after being downgraded briefly. The storm's being called one of America's worst. Head injury rules under review after a scare for the Miami Dolphins. Gemma will have that story and much more in sports. But first, in Burkina Faso, the military have taken control of strategic installations in the capital, Ouagadougou. TV and radio signals are down. There has been heavy gunfire from the main military camp in the city, and the blast could be heard near the presidential palace. On Thursday, there were protests in the streets about the security situation after soldiers were ambushed by rebels earlier this week. Let's get an update from Nicholas Hack. He's joining us from St. Louis. That's a town just north of Dakar over in Senegal. So what are you hearing about the situation in the capital of Burkina Faso?
Well, there was a loud explosion, as you mentioned, an hour ago. Now there's an eerie calm with people trying to figure out who's in charge of the country. The military, so soldiers, are still manning key checkpoints leading to the presidential palace, to the National Assembly, to the parliament. But who are they receiving the orders from? That's the question. It seems no longer from the former strongman, or the strongman of Burkina Faso, Colonel Damiba. Now, Damiba, who took power in a coup in January, deposing President Roch-Marc Kabore, well, we haven't heard from him. There's been rumors on social media and on local news sources that he may have been arrested, but that is yet to be confirmed. What's clear is that this army that's supposed to be there to protect and to fight off armed groups, it seems, are fighting each other. And at the root of all this, of course, is the uptick in attack from armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. Since Damiba came to power, or took over power in January, he came with one promise, Darine, to regain control of the country, to bring back security to people in Burkina Faso. But the situation has gone from bad to worse, with really more attacks closer to the capital, Ouagadougou. And just 3 days ago, a deadly attack on a convoy of the military, where dozens of soldiers were killed, 50 civilians were killed just north of the capital in a northern region, province of Burkina Faso. Darine?
All right, thank you so much. Nicholas Hack reporting from Senegal on the situation, the unfolding situation in Burkina Faso. We'll keep the conversation going with Ornella Moderin. She's an independent political and security analyst who specializes in the Sahel and West Africa. She's joining us from Togo. Welcome to the Al Jazeera News Hour. So obviously it's still a very confusing situation and a developing story, that is. But what are you hearing about the situation in Burkina Faso?
Well, indeed, the situation is still unfolding, so there is a lot of confusion. As your reporter just indicated, heavy gunfire has been heard in Ouagadougou, the capital city of Burkina Faso, this morning. A number of rumors have taken over the social media. So There is, of course, a lot of confusion in a context where the country has been facing long-standing instability and insecurity for the past few years.
Right. So what do you think prompted it? What do you think prompted this, and why now?
So a few months ago, there was a military takeover in the country. Presented as, motivated by the fact that the military wanted to take in charge the security situation and felt that the civilian government wasn't doing good enough. Actually, a few months later, very little progress has been made. So this could be either another iteration of such frustration. There has also been significant mounting tensions within society as well as within the military institutions. So there are various options possible, and it's just way too early to really tell what is going on.
Why do you think that the general hasn't really been able to get a handle on the security situation, and why has there been an uptick in attacks in the country?
Because the situation is extremely complex. So Burkina Faso, first of all, is not confronting a security crisis on its own. This is a situation that affects the whole region, including neighboring Mali and Niger, in different forms. So, of course, one country's response is important, but a regional response is important as well, and many of the other countries have also been facing their own challenges. The second element is that the situation on the ground is really marked by a variety of armed actors. So this includes jihadist groups, this includes ordinary military that's taking advantage of the general chaos. So the complexity of the situation makes it difficult for any single government or entity to really just tackle this and fix it in a few months.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us from Togo. At least 35 people have been killed after a suicide bomber targeted an education center in Kabul. Students were taking part in a test to prepare for their university exams. That attack happened in an area of the capital where many people from the Hazara minority live. Hazaras, a predominantly Shia Muslim group, and they're often targeted because of their race as well as their religious practices. Let's bring in Ahmed Shuja Jamal. He's a former Afghan National Security Council official. He's joining us from Brisbane. Welcome to Al Jazeera. What is your reaction to this attack?
Thank you, Darine. This is a very important story, and I think the factors of vulnerability of the Hazaras that you mentioned, which is their different ethnic identity, but also the fact that they're predominantly, though not exclusively Shias, are factors in which that have led to their significant historic attacks against the community, both by the Taliban in their early years in the 1990s when they were the authorities in Afghanistan, but also by ISIS. And so the Taliban have actually systematically erased the Hazaras from presence in the security forces and from their own ranks, the militant ranks, but they've also erased them from the civilian ranks, which has given left no way for the community to seek and receive the Taliban support and protection as the de facto authority. So all of this has raised fears that Hazaras may be facing a genocide because on the one hand, an actively hostile regime, which is the Taliban, is in power, and on the other, it may be looking on at this power may be on looking as a community that it has marginalized is being targeted by ISIS terrorism. And organizations like the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, for example, have raised the alarms of a possible unfolding genocide against the Hazaras.
So what is it that needs to be done to protect the Hazara community?
I think as the de facto authorities in charge of this particular area, the Taliban have the primary responsibility in stopping any attacks in this area. The area residents have offered many times in the past that they are willing to actually take up arms for self-defense in this area against ISIS attacks. The Taliban have claimed on multiple occasions that they have actually defeated ISIS. But this is the center that ISIS has attacked undefended civilians. So the Taliban, A, are not defending the area, the Hazaras themselves, and B, denying the Hazaras the right to self-defense when they offer that. So that is very important. And obviously it's important for the Taliban as de facto authorities to investigate and hold to account perpetrators in this area. But I think the most important, the biggest question is that all of these things are only piecemeal efforts. What is really required in Afghanistan is a transition towards a regime that is bound by a constitution and is actively chosen, freely chosen by all the peoples of Afghanistan.
Right.
And the Taliban lack both a constitutional framework and are an imposed force on the country, and they cannot protect the population in that way.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us from Brisbane. Still ahead on the Al Jazeera News Hour, we follow the plight of school children in Sudan who are missing out on an education because of flooding. Novak Djokovic cruises to victory in his opening match at the Tel Aviv Open. Action coming up in sport.
It's the type of day you're probably going to end up with soggy socks across the islands of Ireland and Britain. Hi, everyone. All has to do with this run of rain moving into both islands here, but it's not just going to be the rain. The wind will be quite blustery as well. So, for example, in Edinburgh, I think we'll see those wind gusts exceed 85 kilometers per hour. Another spot we've seen some pretty good pulses of rain is coastal Croatia. One spot here picking up a month's worth of rain in the span of 2 hours. Also a run of rain through Hungary, Slovakia, pushing into that southeast corner of Poland, and some of this could be intense stuff. It's also going to be wet and windy for the Balearics, but throughout the day on Friday, we will see an improvement in those conditions. Ibiza up to 21 degrees. High heat, though, for Greece and Turkey. So here's the temperature in Antalya on Friday, 32 degrees. We'll put it a day forward on Saturday, October the 1st. Paint the colors on, darker the red, the higher the temperature. Antalya, 38. Your record temperature for the month of October is 38.7, so we'll see if we can get you there. Also, high temperatures for the top end of Africa, Tripoli at 40. I think the heaviest rain will stay off to the shore of Sierra Leone, and still the risk that we could see some severe thunderstorms bubble up for the Eastern Cape Province in South Africa on Friday. See you later.
Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani International Anti-Corruption Excellence Award. Vote now for your hero.
The top stories on the Al Jazeera News Hour. In Burkina Faso, there's been heavy gunfire overnight in the capital, Ouagadougou. The military is on the ground and has taken control of major streets and other strategic installations. TV and radio signals are down. At least 35 people have been killed after a suicide bomber targeted an education center in Kabul. The attack happened in an area of the capital where many people from the Hazara minority live. At least 23 people have been killed in a missile strike near the southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia. The regional governor says the missile hit a convoy of civilian vehicles in the outskirts of the city. Both Russia and Ukraine are accusing each other for that attack. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has called the leaks in the Nord Stream gas pipelines an act of international terrorism. On Thursday, Sweden confirmed a fourth rupture in the undersea pipelines, which carry Russian natural gas to the EU. NATO says the incidents were an act of deliberate sabotage. The Kremlin denies responsibility. Step Vassen reports from the Danish island of Bornholm.
Bornholm, a laid-back tourist island in the Baltic Sea, has suddenly found itself with a mysterious disaster on its doorstep. Just kilometers away, gas is bubbling up from the Nord Stream pipelines Denmark never wanted in the first place.
Try not to think about it, yes.
Are you worried a bit?
Yes, of course. Nobody knows what it will mean in the future and in the near future.
4 leaks have been detected since explosions in the area earlier this week. Seismologists say only explosives larger than 100 kilograms can cause these kinds of tremors. Europe blames Russia for sabotaging its own pipelines. Moscow has rejected the accusations and is blaming the Americans.
Look back at what you said and you will understand who wins from this situation. Explosions in Nord Stream 1 and 2.
The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines connecting Russia with Germany were controversial from the start. But since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Germany in particular has been heavily criticized for making itself too dependent on Russian gas. While hundreds of millions cubic meters of gas continue to leak into the Baltic Sea, everyone is still waiting for answers. What exactly has caused the possibly irreparable damage to the pipelines and who could be behind it? People here on Bornholm Island, the island closest to the leaks, hope that these questions will be answered soon. Some say they know the answer already.
I grew up here, and we are used to the Russians flying, and there are submarines in the Swedish area, and so on. I think they are trying to tell us that they can do anything if they want.
But others aren't so sure why Moscow would damage its own $35 billion project.
The problem here is this. No matter how confidently one can identify how this happened and possibly who caused it, in the wider world, people believe who they want to believe. And there is enough vagary here, potentially, for people to doubt whatever narrative that comes out.
And so the energy wars continue, with people here on Bornholm concerned that there is more to come. Step Vassen, Al Jazeera, on Bornholm Island in the Baltic Sea.
We have Natasha Butler standing by in Paris covering the emergency meeting of EU energy ministers. But first, let's bring in Step Vassen, who's still in Bornholm Island in Denmark with the latest step on the pipeline leaks. And as you say in your report, the big questions of who and what actually caused the leak still remain.
Absolutely, still many questions here also on Bornholm Island. And the latest is now that the Danish Navy has sent 2 warships to the island in a clear sign that tensions in the Baltic Sea are actually really going up, especially since these leaks were detected at Nord Stream. We know that the Norwegians are also securing their gas and oil installations, and also this newly installed pipeline between Norway and Poland, which was actually installed and inaugurated exactly at the day when the Nord Stream leaks were detected, is also now being checked because it is apparently in the nearer vicinity of these Nord Stream leaks. So there's a lot of concern because the sea contains a lot of pipes and very crucial data cables, but also electricity cables. So there's a lot of concern, and these leaks also show how vulnerable these energy supplies and all these supplies for Europe are. Meanwhile, Russia has issued the strongest statement so far of Western involvement, as they call it, with the sabotage of these leaks. It's coming from the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Narishkin, and he said that they have materials of a Western trace, he says, in this sabotage operation. He hasn't declared or explained what this evidence is, but this is the clearest statement coming from Russia so far. This island is a very strategic island, both between NATO and Russia, and there have been statements coming from Russia before, just a few months ago after the war in Ukraine started, about any possible foreign presence, any possible NATO presence on North Holm Island, which would really upset them. So there is a lot going on geopolitical here on this island.
All right. Thank you so much, Steph Vassen, reporting from Bornholm Island. EU countries, have agreed to impose emergency levies on energy firms' windfall profits. On that story, Natasha Butler is joining us from Paris. So, Natasha, the EU ministers have agreed some measures in order to try to mitigate the rise in energy prices. Tell us more about these measures and what they are.
Well, that's right. The Nord Stream pipeline leaks and the looming winter here in Europe have certainly increased pressure on the EU to try and come up with ways to shield consumers from these rising energy prices. And it seems that energy ministers from the EU meeting in Brussels have come up, at least with some measures. What they're going to put in place, they say, are mandatory measures for power saving. So things that would perhaps make it compulsory for some companies to reduce their energy consumption over the coming months. They'll also impose a windfall tax on some energy companies that don't rely on gas but have been making huge profits during this energy crisis, and also what they call a solidarity tax on fossil fuel companies. Now, the idea is that the money from those taxes would then be diverted into poorer households across the European Union to try and help people, consumers, with their energy bills, because many ministers, governments in the EU are very worried indeed that if the energy crisis continues to hit people in their homes where they're struggling to pay their bills, that we could be seeing social unrest across the EU at some point. Now, one other issue that's very much on the table is this idea of an EU-wide cap on the price of gas imports. Now, this has been discussed before in EU circles in terms of a cap on the price of gas imports from Russia. But what 15 member states have recently really been pushing for is for a price cap on gas imports from other countries, from all countries importing into the European Union. They say that would help reduce prices. They say the price cap limit could be put at such a rate that it would still make the EU very competitive on the international market. But until now, the European Union Commission has been quite reticent to implement such a cap, because they say it could dissuade countries from wanting to export their gas to the European Union, LNG, for example, coming in a vital source of energy at this time.
All right, thank you so much, Natasha Butler, reporting from Paris. U.S. President Joe Biden says he's hearing reports that many lives have been lost after Hurricane Ian hit Florida. At least 13 people have died in one of the strongest ever hurricanes to hit the state. Patty Culhane has the details.
Whoa. Destructive winds, record storm surge, and in some places up to 30 centimeters of rain that fell in just 12 to 24 hours. Another record breaker.
We got out the door, swam out the door as the water was here. And then we got over onto this, and then we walked our way around the whole side of the house from the roof line, and then swam over to that pontoon boat.
The storm was different. It broke all the rules, and we've been here a really long time.
My chimney came down. I was afraid it was going to come through the roof and crush me.
And now in its wake, the search for those who survived and those that didn't.
There have been more than 700 confirmed rescues, and there's likely many more than that that will be confirmed as more data comes in.
The president, touring the agency that deals with disasters, warned the death toll could be shocking.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history. The numbers are still unclear, but we're hearing early reports of what may be substantial loss of life.
That would put the number of dead over 2,000. And it's going to take a while to find out the true scale of the disaster. The lone bridge to Sanibel Island had large chunks washed away, and many roads are still unpassable. And it's not over.
We are expecting the storm to continue making its way to Georgia, South Carolina, and into North Carolina. maintaining tropical storm force winds, deadly storm surge, and rainfall of up to 12 inches.
A historic storm that experts say was made stronger by warming waters. Now people all across Florida are seeing the true costs of climate change. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera.
Recent floods in Sudan have destroyed hundreds of schools, especially in rural parts of the country, and that's led to the postponement of the start of the school year. 1 out of 3 children are already out of school. There are concerns that more delays will increase that number. Hiba Morgan reports from Kassala in eastern Sudan.
Zainab Abbakar is helping her son Ammar get ready to start the school year. He was due to start his 6th grade more than a week ago.
The start of the school year has been postponed 3 times this year. First, we were told it would start in September. Then we were told the 2nd of October. Then they told us this week that
those schools that were untouched by the flooding are now used as shelters by families who lost their homes. At least 600 schools have been damaged by floods this year. The repeated delays and school closures over the past few years has led to fewer children returning to classrooms. Nearly 7 million children are out of school this year, up from just under 4 million in 2018. Most of the damage occurred in rural areas where schools are built from poor materials. Not being able to go to school puts children at risk.
Practically on the ground, what that means for children is that they're much more susceptible to being trafficked, to being exploited, to being abused, to child labor, to not having access to opportunities of anything in the job market. And once a child drops out, it becomes harder to get them back in.
Kassala's government says it's doing what it can to get kids back in school.
We'll try to compensate the damages using the materials we received from the federal government or the state government or aid organizations. But it will be hard. We want to have an exact number of how many schools were destroyed so we can distribute the available resources for schools to resume.
Ammar's mother worries her son is starting to lose interest in education due to the constant delays. She hopes that schools open on time before he drops out and jeopardizes his future. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Kassala, Eastern Sudan.
In Brazil, the final presidential debate has taken place ahead of Sunday's election. 7 candidates are vying for the top job. The former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is leading incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in opinion polls. If no candidate gets 50% of the vote, there'll be a runoff later in October. India's central bank has raised its base rate by 0.5% for the 4th consecutive time. This is because of rising inflation and the rupee falling to its lowest level against the dollar. India's official inflation rate stands at 7.4%, affecting the country's outlook for economic growth. And stocks in the U.S. dropped to their lowest level since late 2020 as recession fears persist. Investors are worried about what impact an interest rate hike will have on inflation. The S&P 500 index is down more than 8% this month. That's the worst September performance since the 2008 global financial crisis. Still ahead on the Al Jazeera NewsHour, rough